Good morning, everyone. A huge thank you for joining this virtual carers conference this morning. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Andy McGowan. I'm the head of engagement at the charity Caring Together. So we support carers of all ages across Cambridgeshire, Peterborough, as well as Norfolk. Just to make clear, we are recording the sessions throughout the day. So if you don't want to be seen on camera, please do just keep your camera off as well. So just in terms of a bit of housekeeping to get us started, so if people can ensure that their microphones are on mute. If you're wanting to come in at any point throughout the session, if you can raise your hands, there will be time later on for sort of questions and sort of comments as well. Particularly keen for any carers on the call, if you're hearing things that really chime with you or you want to share your experiences, I'm really keen to bring you into the conversation as well. Please do use the chat. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. It's a really good networking opportunity as well. And again, we can share details and extracts from the chat after the conference itself. If you leave the session, so if you've got caring responsibilities, if you've got other meetings, that's absolutely fine. You can return in and out using the same Zoom link all day. Do just bear with me, because if I'm sharing a film or anything, I need to let you back into the room as well. So you'll just be hanging around in the lobby until I can let you in. And for any of you who are on Twitter, please do feel free to join in the conversation. So you've got the hashtag Carers Conference and also hashtag Carers Rights Day. And just to set the scene in terms of what this conference is all about and where it's come from, it's essentially it's all about what matters most to carers. So it's been organised by all of the carer support organisations who are commissioned by the local authority, Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council. So that's ourselves at Caring Together, Making Space and Centre 33, alongside the Parent-Carer Forum, so Family Voice and Pinpoint, and as I mentioned, the local authorities. There's a whole variety of carers' experiences and carers' voices feeding into the sessions today, either directly or through videos or different quotes as well. And all of the topics on the agenda are ones that have been voted for by carers. So hopefully, whether you're a carer or someone who works with carers, you'll find something of use for you today as well. The slides will be shared afterwards as well for anyone from that perspective. So just in terms of the agenda, so we're going to go straight from the welcome and introduction session into the next one, so there won't be a gap between them. So the first one will be all around carers' experiences with health and social care professionals. Then we'll have a break for half an hour before the next session at 11:30, looking at the impact of caring on carers. So that includes the impact on young carers and young adult carers, on parent carers, and as well as adult carers. Then again, there'll be a half an hour break for lunch. And then after lunch, we'll be looking at the support available for carers and also what some of their rights are. As you'll hopefully all be aware, tomorrow is Carers Rights Day, and so it felt only apt to make sure that we cover around some of what carers' rights are in this conference today. And then we'll also be getting an update from the local authority in relation to the carer strategy. So many of you may have fed into that refresh in terms of the survey or sharing your experiences. So we'll have the opportunity to hear where we're at from that perspective as well. And then the final part of the day, and it's deliberately been put in this time slot so that actually young carers themselves can be a really integral part of it, we'll be looking at the experiences of young carers as well. So I would really encourage people to make sure you're here for those sessions. It's obviously they're at school at the moment or at college, so we're really keen to make sure that their voices are heard as well in this conversation. So I'm not going to read out the definition of the screen on the screen, but just for anyone who isn't aware as to who we're talking about carers, as you can see, it's a really wide variety of people we're talking about. So they could be supporting someone with a physical illness, a mental illness from that perspective, or an addiction. And we're really keen today to make sure we're focusing on the widest variety of groups of carers as well. So irrespective of the age of the person that they care for or the age of the carer. And in terms of the numbers we're talking about, in the last census, and this is rather dated figures now, so in the 2011 census, we're looking at over 77,000 people in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough were identified as carers. This will be an underestimation because it relied on the person completing the census to realise that there was a carer in the household. And for many people, whether they're a young carer supporting their parent, whether it's a husband supporting their wife, whether it's someone supporting their next door neighbour, often don't realise that they're carers as well. The 2021 census figures will be coming out in the next couple of months as well. So that'll be a really useful opportunity to see how much it has increased since 2011. You'll be glad to know this conference isn't just going to be about statistics, it isn't just going to be about facts and figures. And so really to set the scene, I'm going to show just a couple of short videos really to set some of the context about who we're talking about as well. So I'm just going to pick on people I can see on my screen. So I can see Sue Evans, Joy Rutherford and Zed Ruddle. When I start the film, if I can just get a thumbs up just to make sure that you can hear the sound, that would be much appreciated as well.
You don't see us, but we're there. We're the ones who care. You don't see us hoisting, washing, cleaning, feeding, because if we don't, our loved ones will be needing. It's endless reams of paperwork, trips to A&E, constant guilt and stress and strain, never-ending anxiety.
You don't see us.
Or know that we feel bereft, trying to snatch just a minute or two so we can catch our breath. We don't have a union, holidays or sick pay. There's not enough support or services and we make less than minimum wage.
You don't see us.
Holding in the screams, giving up our sense of self, putting aside our dreams. The night becomes the day and the days merge into one. It's either Groundhog Day or a day where it all goes wrong.
I just said I don't want to do it today. Oliver?
You don't see us.
But we live in your towns and cities. We want you to understand and offer support instead of pity. Anyone can become a carer with no manual or guide or practical advice on how to navigate their life. We want to feel seen and heard and be able to have our say. We need more than just a clap on the doorstep. We need dignified pay, support, compensation, respect, recognition, because nobody chooses to be in this position. Do you see us?
We're everywhere. We're the ones.
The ones who care.
So that was a really powerful film from the We Care campaign, which is a national group of unpaid carers, all who are coming together to try and improve that recognition and support. And the next one I'm going to show you is one that's come from the Young Carers National Voice. So that is a network of young carer organisations across the country who are all sort of involved in young carers participation. And so we've got a couple of young carers who are a part of this. So what they've put together is a poem. The words came from a group of young carers up in Sheffield, but then it's voiced by young carers from all over the country. So some of the young carers involved with Caring Together have voiced some of the voices in this as well. And again, it's really just to show you actually in terms of actually what it's like being a young carer and some of the challenges as well. And just to really flag, as I mentioned in the agenda, at 3:45, we will be showing a sort of a film from Centre 33 Young Carers Advisory Board, which is an extended film, so it's around 15 minutes long, but really gives a really powerful insight into the lives of young carers. So I would really encourage people to come along for that session at 3:45. But I'll just let you hear from the words of young carers now.
May I have your attention, a few minutes of your time?
Take a break from your life, I'll tell you how I live mine.
See this face, see this smile, see these eyes open wide.
It's a mask to disguise how I'm feeling inside.
1 in 12 in my city, yet it's hard to describe. But just give me one moment. I promise I'll try.
I'm a cook, a cleaner, a doctor, a healer, a helper, a sitter, a supporter, a leader.
By my demeanour, it may not always be clear that I'm needed.
When my mum takes a fall, has a fit or a seizure. When my brother breaks his toys and I pick up the pieces.
When his autism means that even though I pleaded, he kicks and screams, and every day this is repeated. But before bed I still hug him because I know he doesn't mean it.
And some might say that this sounds strange. Why I have these skills and I don't even get paid.
When I get home from school and I make sure the table is laid because my dad is upstairs, still in bed, still afraid.
I'm sorry, did I not mention?
That his mind is affected by stress and by tension.
Depression, that means he requires my attention.
So my homework goes unwritten with no chance of extension.
I shop, I feed, I help shower and bathe. I wash, I make sure that all the beds are made.
I talk, I listen, I cuddle, I play.
I make sure that the medicine is stored safely away.
And even though I know that those who love me understand,
It's hard to keep up friendships when I'm having to cancel plans.
When phone calls go unanswered and when they say they'll lend a hand, sometimes it feels that it's only me who can.
So thank you for listening to the words I have to say.
About how I live my life, about what I do each day.
I hope, I dream, I wonder, I pray.
Because I am a young carer, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
And that was really just a sort of a really useful snapshot about actually just the variety again of experiences that young carers find themselves in, whether they're supporting a sibling, whether it's a parent, whether it's because of a physical disability or a mental illness or addiction or learning disabilities, a whole variety. And there's no one size fits all when it comes to young carers. But again, it really hopefully gave a flavour of some of the issues we're going to be exploring throughout the conference today. So as I mentioned, we are going to move straight on, we're a couple of minutes ahead of time, which is no bad thing, to our first substantive session today, which is looking at carers' experiences of health and social care professionals. So as I mentioned, all of the topics that have been selected for today's conference were ones where we put out a long list of carers, and they voted to say which ones did they want people to hear about as well. And just to say, for those of you who are carers on this call today, if you're hearing anything that you think actually, yes, that really chimes with you and you want to contribute, please do feel free to share your experiences if you're comfortable with it in the chat, or you can sort of put your hand up to come in later on as well, because I really want to hear a wide range of messages. And similarly, for those of you who are carers, I'm very mindful that actually some of the things we talk about might be quite hard-hitting today, and it might be quite close to home. So just to say, in terms of if any of you do need any support or realise actually I might need some extra support, the Caring Together helpline is open. Our advisors are on the call, ready to sort of speak to carers. But do feel free to get in touch with them if you do feel actually today is highlighted you need a bit of extra support. So when it comes to health and care professionals, why is it so important? So as hopefully many of you will sort of acknowledge and accept, when it comes to the person who's got a health condition, often it's the carer who knows the most about them. They know the most about the person in terms of actually when they're having a good day, when they're having a bad day, when they're sort of their demeanour has changed from that perspective. But it also can give a really useful insight that the person themselves sometimes might not even see when it comes to someone with a mental illness, actually really understanding in terms of actually how they are doing at the moment. Actually, how are they sort of coping with everyday challenges? Something that's even more prominent at the moment with things like the cost of living crisis that we're seeing. And similarly, when someone's discharged from hospital, which again has been really topical in the news in the last week or so, without the carer, many of them would find themselves back into hospital within days or even hours of leaving, particularly given some of the pressures on social care, both from an adult's perspective and children's at the moment. So it's absolutely vital that we're really acknowledging that the carer needs that support as well. There are pressures being faced by health and care professionals, but there's equally those pressures being faced by unpaid carers day in and day out. And again, I'll talk in more detail in a moment and then later on as well but actually carers, including young carers, have actually got new legal rights in relation to health and care professionals. So the Health and Care Act came in earlier this year and really sort of gave carers really clear rights in relation to hospital discharge as well. As I mentioned, the Health and Care Act, so it gives young carers and adult carers the right to be consulted ahead of discharge from hospital. So if they're supporting an adult who's likely to have need for support or have needs for care when they come out of hospital, there is that duty now to consult with them at the earliest possible opportunity. And again, at Caring Together, we often hear from carers where actually they get the phone call half an hour before discharge, or even sometimes we've heard stories where the person's already on their way home, maybe in hospital transport, and the carer didn't even know. So for carers who might have their own health conditions, for carers who might be balancing caring with work, that can add such huge amounts of stress and pressures to them as well. It's worth saying that Carers UK have produced a checklist specifically for carers around hospital discharge. So there is a link in the slides. So I would really suggest if you support someone who is frequently in hospital or that they might need to go into hospital, do take a look at that checklist. Because I heard from a carer a couple of weeks ago who emailed me over the weekend to share their experiences at one of the hospitals. And when I shared that checklist with them, it was really telling to them just how much didn't happen in relation to their experience of hospital discharge as well. But it's not just about hospitals. So if you're not aware, integrated care boards, integrated care partnerships, integrated care systems, these are the new ways and the new systems being used about how health and care is arranged in local areas. So the integrated care board has taken on some of the responsibilities, or most of the responsibilities, of what was called the clinical commissioning group previously. So they look at how to sort of fund local health services, and they've got a duty to make sure that carers are now being consulted both around the care and treatment of the person they care for, but also in the planning and delivery of local services. So this is something at Caring Together we're really, really keen to make sure that carers, parent carers and young carers are really being included in the conversations. It's really timely because this has a huge impact on how sort of carers can be identified as well. So the question in terms of the checklist, so it is something we have shared with the hospitals, but we're more than happy if anyone hasn't got it to share it as well. My contact details will be available later on, so I'm more than happy to share it, and I'll send it out when we send the slides later on as well. And as I mentioned, we're working with various other organisations to make sure that these rights become a reality for carers. Because what we see is actually, and we'll talk about it later on, carers of all ages have got lots of different rights, both legal rights and also things that are in policy and statutory guidance, but actually they're often not happening in practice. And I think given some of the challenges being faced at the moment within financial pressures, both for local authorities, for health, for schools, it's really important to make sure that those rights aren't lost for carers as well. So some of you may have been involved, some of you may have been heard, but in terms of today, we are publishing our Carers Speak Out report. So we launched Carers Speak Out as a platform back in Carers Week in June. And this was really an opportunity for carers to have their say about what are the most important issues for them, or what do they want local decision makers to know, or the public to know about what it's like being a carer. And as you can see here, there are 4 key themes that came out. We had a wide range of messages, from people supporting people with dementia, to people balancing work with supporting after a child, to a young carer who's supporting a parent with mental illness. We had such a wide variety of messages, but there were 4 constant themes that came throughout as well. We will be again sharing a copy of the report later on, because there's some really powerful messages that come out of it. But in relation to health and care professionals, I'm just going to stop for a moment and just let you read on the screen here, just to see, so in relation to this hospital discharge, just some of the messages coming through from carers. So I think what you can see really powerfully here is actually saying the impact on the carer. Or actually, if there isn't communication in place, if there isn't a properly thought through plan, if they're not involving a carer within that, it can have a huge impact both on the carer's physical health, but also their mental well-being as well. And that's obviously something that we'll be covering in the session later on. And again, I'll just let you have a look at this one. And just to say, in terms of questions that come up in the chat, if we don't get a chance to cover them today, or if I'm not sure of the answer, I will go away and check with you from that perspective. So I see that there is a question that's come through from Mike in the chat asking about does that checklist apply to private hospitals who are now undertaking NHS work? What I'll do is my colleague Jodie Deards, who's our carer lead from NHS England for the region. I'll check with Jodie. She's on the call as well, but I think that's something that she'll hopefully be able to check with her colleague because she doesn't know the answer as to whether that applies to private hospitals as well. I'm pretty sure it does, but again, I want to make sure we give you the accurate answer on that one. As you can see in this quote here, actually the experience of the person who's in hospital actually can have a significant impact again on the carer in terms of, for some carers, they say that when the person's in hospital, it's a form of break for them from that sense. For others, it's not, because they're still continuing to provide that care when they're in hospital. But actually for others, where they're trying to catch up with work or support other children in the household, or just have time for themselves as well. So actually it can really impact on what they're trying to do if they don't know and they can't be reassured that the person they're caring for is getting the care that they need. And so that's why we work really closely with the hospitals, with their sort of patient experience teams, to make sure that any feedback that we get from carers, that actually that's being fed through to the hospital. Thanks, Jodie, for your reply on that question there. And again, just going to let you have a read of this one here about some of the impacts. So this is in relation to someone with dementia, supporting someone with dementia. And I think for me, with the Carers Speak Out report, what's so powerful is that I often talk about facts and figures. I talk about potential savings to the NHS, potential savings to the local authority. I use statistics a lot, but actually hearing it and seeing it firsthand from carers about actually what it means to them and the impact it has for them when things don't go right or when they're not involved is so much more powerful than anything I'll be able to say throughout this conference today. So I think the key message is just around how much of an impact that this can have when carers aren't involved and aren't included. And it's not just healthcare. I appreciate I don't want to be seen as hitting my healthcare colleagues with a stick today. I appreciate the pressures they're under, but we see also it's in wider settings, so within sort of social care and provider of sort of home care. So here you can see actually in terms of some positive feedback about the people going into their home providing care, but also again just the impact it has on the unpaid carer when they don't know what time the person's going to be turning up. So the fact that actually they turn up any time between half 7 and 10 from that perspective actually makes it really difficult, both for the carer, but also the person they care for as well. And so again, that's where actually communication about what time or any changes to routines coming in, but also where possible, having that consistency. As a charity Caring Together, we provide home care, and where we can, we try to have that same care worker to give that consistency. They get to know the person they're caring for and get to know the carer. And again, they're in a really good place to identify potential carers in need of support as well. But it's also not negative. Through the Carers Speak Out, we also had carers who wanted to share positive experiences about that. And this is one where, again, there's lots of negativity sort of thrown around about experiences around health and social care, understandably so. But as you can see here, actually, just to show what a difference it can make when we get it right as well. So you can see here again, access to respite and having a break is something that's really, really important for carers and can be a challenge for many of them. But you can see here just the difference it made for this carer being able to have that break and where the system worked really well. And I think amplifying some of these messages, say, yes, here are the negative experiences, but also here are the positive experiences as well and the difference that it can make. And I'm keen also for people to realise it's not just about adult carers. So what I'm going to share with you now is a video that actually comes from across the border over in Norfolk, but it's of a young carer that we're working with and supporting as part of our Young Carers Forum over there. and his experience of hospital discharge, because often when people think about hospital discharge, they think about adult carers from that sense, but actually, are they thinking about the young carer? Because as you'll see in this experience here, actually, he's at school, he was at college, so they probably wouldn't see James most of the time, but it just really highlights the importance of recognising young carers, but also making sure that they're involved in conversations, and most importantly, linked into support as well. So I'm just going to share this video now.
I am my mum's main carer. I have been since just before I was 7. I'm now 17. She has a wide array of illnesses, and I do main care roles. Apart from personal care, mainly making sure she's taken medication, cooking, helping her up and down the stairs, helping her around the house. I'll do shopping for her, make sure that everything is ready to go for the next day, or basically look after the house and her. The end of September, Mum had collapsed and wasn't right. I ended up calling 111. When I first went in to see her the next day, she was with the doctor. We explained everything that had gone on. It felt like we were getting spoken to. Everything was fine. I wasn't concerned that they were going to send it home too early because everyone was just trying to get stuff done. She then moved ward. That's when things started going downhill. I didn't feel like I was getting listened to at all. While she was in, I had to call the GP to see if they could talk to the hospital for me because no one was listening to me. And they said there's not a lot we can do because we can't override what the hospital are doing. She was having medication changes that wasn't being communicated to her, which would stress her out more. I couldn't get anything from it because I wasn't next of kin, so they wouldn't talk to me. The experiences would put a lot of stresses on me. She called me at midnight on a school night in floods of tears because nobody was listening to her. I lost all faith in the hospital, treating her the way they were and not really listening to me either. No matter how many times I said, I am the main carer, I am the one who is looking after her, nothing was brought forward. To be honest, I don't even think anything was actually put down on the notes, despite Mum being told there was, because I feel if it had been put on the notes, they would have spoken to me. While she was still in hospital and I was living on my own at the house, I had the mental health team call me several times thinking she'd been discharged. I had occupational therapist at the house thinking she'd been discharged, which added more stresses because I'm thinking, well, why haven't I been told all of this? And is she being discharged today? Is there stuff going on that I've not been told about? And it just seemed to go on forever. I asked countless times, can I have a meeting with the discharge team and her clinical team before she gets discharged, so I'm aware of everything that they've done, and concerns that I have been raised and answered. That never happened. I ended up having a meeting just with a discharge clerk. There wasn't a lot he could answer, and she was discharged with the wrong care plan, so they signed her off, and then we've heard nothing. The occupational therapist has been in and assessed her over the phone because of Mum's anxiety. She doesn't like people going in the house, so Mum would have been more open had they didn't get to see her physically assessed. I would have liked them to have just put a foot down and gone, no, we've got to assess you at home. After she'd been discharged, there was not really any involvement with me at all, and I just felt really let down by the hospital, and I'm worried about her going in again. I would like the hospital to recognise the triangle of care between patient, clinician and then carer, that everyone is actually included in the treatment and in processing care and discharge plans, because at the end of the day, the carer is the one who's got to implement that plan to an extent. They need to know what's going on, especially as a young carer. It worries us if we don't know what's going on at home. So if we know that on a Tuesday there's meant to be a carer coming in, that's fine. But it would be nice to know that, not have to wait until discharge, especially for the older young carers, the teenagers, given the fact that they are on their own, especially if they're on their own, with the person who's being cared for.
So with that video there, and again, I have to give full credit to the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital. They agreed to put that video together and that animation to share James's negative experience from that perspective. But it's worth to say that isn't alien, that isn't just applicable to the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital. We know actually that there are many opportunities to improve the identification and support of young carers as well. And that's going to be shown in just some of the quotes that actually young carers from 10 to 33 have put forward. And as you can see here, there's a real wide variety of these that really chime with what you heard in James's video. So actually saying here that people come and see their sister, but don't actually even recognise that the young carer is there, even though that actually the young carer is the person who calms the sister down, knows what she likes, what she doesn't like from that perspective. So there's a huge amount of knowledge from that sense, which could help the person who's looking to provide that care and that care and treatment for her sister. That'll be exactly the same for adult carers and parent carers. Such a source of knowledge around what works, what doesn't work, triggers from that perspective. But again, it's about making sure that they're being acknowledged and included as well. And again here saying that actually, so when this young carer's dad was discharged from hospital, no one thought to ask, were they okay to look after him? So actually saying, well, he's going to be discharged, he's going home to a young carer. Saying actually, what position is that putting that young carer in from that perspective? What impact is it having on that young carer in terms of their schooling, in terms of their own health and well-being from that perspective? But also in terms of actually, do they feel comfortable, and is it appropriate for them to be doing some of the things that are being asked of them from that sense? But even more importantly, saying actually, have those young carers got the support they've heard that they need from that sense? So I'll never forget a situation where we got a phone call on a Friday afternoon, and it was from one of the local hospitals from that perspective. So I will name them from this one. So this was one at Hinchinbrook, where actually there was a lady about to be discharged. She had a real crisis around her mental health from that perspective. But the person who was sorting out the discharge was very mindful. She also had a teenage daughter who's coming to see her. And the fact that she wanted to make sure, yes, there's a discharge plan in place for the patient, but also wanted to make sure that she put in place a plan for the young carer as well. For me, that is the gold standard. To this day, that is the only phone call I've had like that from that perspective. And it wouldn't it be amazing if we get to a point where that was business as usual? So when you're looking at actually discharging a patient, thinking actually, okay, there's a carer here, or there's a potential carer, have they got the information that they need? Have they got the support they need as well? And I think what we also often tend to find, particularly at Caring Together, is that at hospital discharge, carers are often bombarded with lots of different information, lots of different leaflets. So again, are there ways that we can look at to ease that pressure, that burden for carers, and do the work for them to help make sure they get linked into support they might benefit from, without saying, right, here's a leaflet, and you go make that phone call. But again, when we hear from carers, they say that when the person's discharged, often that can be even more difficult than when before they went in, whether it's their own physical health has changed, or just in terms of side effects from that perspective, or just recuperation as well. And as you see, the reason for that is because actually it means they can get support much earlier. So you can see here saying that actually they wish a social worker had told them about young carers. And I think this is what we often tend to see, and you'll hear so much more in Centre 33 session later on, is that often young carers don't get identified until it gets to crisis point, until it gets to a safeguarding perspective, until their attendance is being impacted, in terms of their mental health is being impacted. And again, I'll be sharing some insights into that in the next session later on this morning. But actually, the difference it could make if we could identify them at the earliest possible opportunity. So whether that's the social worker who's working with the adults, whether it's the GP, whether it's within the hospital, whoever it might be, the mental health worker from that sense, all of those people have opportunities as well. And you can see in here about actually getting feedback around overload of information. This is something that we hear so often from carers as well. So it's really important for those of us who work with carers to think about how can we make it as easy as possible? How can we make the system easy to navigate so they can get to the support that they need at the right time as well? And one example of how we did this, so earlier this year, ourselves and the Alzheimer's Society worked on a small pilot project for carers of someone with delirium, where actually we gave them sort of intensive support over a fortnight, where what we did is literally just did 5-minute phone calls each morning or every couple of days. We agreed it with a carer. What it meant is it could be drip fed. It meant we didn't just have to bombard them in an hour-long phone call with, well, there's this here, you can get a carer's assessment, you can sign up for a what if plan, have you got the carer's magazine, maybe you need to get the occupational therapist involved, maybe we need to look at some sort of technology to enable you to get better support. So again, that project really enabled us to sort of really drip feed in a way that was meaningful for carers. So they had that opportunity to ask questions, but also meant they weren't being overloaded as well. And it'd be great to see similar projects like that replicated for other carers as well. And I think the one that really stands out to me that I just sort of want to finish on the young carers section is just how mind-boggling this is. But the fact that actually a young carer went to the GP, to the receptionist, to say there was a young carer. And that very rarely happens. Not many young carers go to their GP about their caring responsibilities. Not many of them go there and ask for support from that sense. In fact, they went to the GP, they went to tell a receptionist they were a young carer, and they got signposted to the job centre. And it's just saying, actually, in terms of, it's just mind-boggling as to how that happened from that sense. But it really powerfully illustrates that need to make sure that care awareness is embedded, not just with GPs, not just with hospital staff, but also that wider organisation as well from that perspective. And as I said, it's not just be about hearing from me. So we are going to be sort of hearing from sort of carers directly sort of throughout the course of today. And so I'm really delighted that Sam, who's a parent carer involved with Pinpoint, has kindly said that Sam would be willing to share their experiences as well. So I saw Sam join the call earlier. So I'm hoping Sam is still here. I don't know if you want to turn your camera and your microphone on, if you can hear me.
I'm on.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Sam. Really grateful for you willing to share your experiences this morning. I didn't know if you wanted to start just by sharing a bit about you and your sort of caring situation.
Yeah, I'm a mum to 3 boys. We have sort of a lot of caring happening in our household. I have a long-term condition which my husband is listed as my primary carer for that. My children, depending on how my health is, act as young carers to me in certain circumstances. But my 3 children are all autistic as well, with other associated neurodiversities and speech and language issues. And I am, myself and my husband are carers for them. And I think in my role as sort of mum to 3 children with additional needs, the thing that sort of makes the biggest difference to us is when we feel listened to and heard, particularly in appointments with professionals. So my youngest, we suspected he was autistic from the time he was about 12 months old. I started noticing, lots of the same sort of signs that we'd seen, particularly in my eldest son. And so having 2 older children with autism, I was already sort of clued in and keeping an eye out, because we already knew that, they were much more likely to, each subsequent, children of siblings who have an autism diagnosis are much more likely to be autistic themselves. So yeah, the pandemic hit when he was about 2 years old. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is just going to grind everything to a halt. We've got sort of a 2-year window before he starts school. We need to try and get the ball rolling, but I'm not sure what that's going to look like because of the pandemic. And so I was quite concerned with how just all the sort of interlinked assessments and support was going to look like for us as a family. And in all honesty, it was probably the best experience of the 3, because I felt listened to and validated by the health visitor who put the referral through for early support. The early support team accepted us onto that pathway, which was fantastic. And within about 4 months, we had a pediatrician appointment and a speech and language appointment as well. And my concern for both of those appointments was, would they agree to diagnose virtually, or would they insist that they see him face to face? And obviously with the pandemic, that would delay things quite significantly. But both of those departments really sort of used the opportunity of the virtual appointments to get really good detailed information. They carried out sort of separate video appointments, but asked all the right questions. They you know, allowed me to, you know, they gave me instructions on what to do, and I sort of held my phone camera so that they could see how my son was responding. And yeah, we got his diagnosis during that video appointment, and it was confirmed again by speech and language. They kept in phone contact with us the whole time. Every time, you know, he's sort of made a bit of progress, we can come straight back to the team. They open his case immediately, provide us with an episode of care, and, you know, then close it until the next time we need them. And I think that really good communication with us, but particularly with appreciating and sort of validating what we have to say and believing what we have to say, because, you know, we are the experts in our children. We live with them every single day. And that has made this experience of getting my son the diagnosis and thereafter the support that he needs. Yeah, it just made such a big difference, even during the challenges of the pandemic. And I think in appointments that we've had with my older children where things haven't gone as well is when we as parents, our views and our input isn't given the right weight, I think. And yeah, I think that's sort of the biggest thing, is making sure that you're in a sort of relationship with all the health professionals where all of your voices are being heard.
And I think it really echoes into what James said in the video about that triangle of care. So the triangle of care is a really defined concept. It's used particularly within mental health settings. But again, actually, those principles are one that actually should apply to any health and social care professional, and say, actually, okay, you've got the person who's got those care support needs, they're a key part of this jigsaw. You've got the health professional or social care professional, they're a key part. But also equally, you've got that care, as you said, you're there day in, day out. When they're not in hospital, when they're not having that treatment, you're the one providing that support as well. And you can see the signs and you can add so much useful information to them and as well. And I think the other bit that really stood out to me was what you're saying about that flexibility. The fact that actually, yes, lots of things had to go virtual during the pandemic, but actually I think that's, again, a really good opportunity to how do we make sure that that flexibility isn't lost for carers. I think for some carers, they really value face-to-face from that sense, or having that space. Again, we've heard cases from parent carers where they're asked, and how are you doing? How are you finding sort of caring for your son, when their son sat right next to them? So they're not going to say, actually, no, I'm really struggling with him at the moment. I'm really struggling with his outbursts. They're not going to say that when he sat right next to them. So I think that's a really key message there about how do we maintain that flexibility for carers as well. And I think I'm really interested, Sam, so it's really clear there's lots of challenges for you and your family in terms of lots of different health needs from that sense. So do you get a sense that there has been that sort of looking at your needs as a family, as a whole family, rather than looking at you in isolation, looking in terms of your carer, looking at your children as separate?
I think in relation to the children, you know, my health needs have been taken into account. But when it comes to me as the sort of primary patient, I'm not sure that the children's caring role is necessarily as clearly recognized. So when they are having to, my older children having to sort of help out with, particularly my younger son who's 4, when I'm not able to, so managing that. But also when my health deteriorates and I'm needing to call them to get me medications and things quite quickly, you know, even my 4-year-old knows where to go and get them for me. But again, I don't know that their role in being young carers is as clearly recognized. And it's something that I need to try and drive forward, is them being recognized as young carers.
Definitely, and I think that's a really common message, is that actually in terms of, particularly amongst health and social care professionals, there's still a lot of work to do. Centre 33 have been doing some brilliant work with the Mental Health Trust, with the GPs to raise awareness, because they're just not identifying them, often because they don't see them. Actually, if you go and do an appointment during the day and the children are at school, for example, you're not going to see them. What you will see is toys around the house or pictures of children on the walls from that sense. So just, again, that professional curiosity to say, hang on, there are children in this household. How does this impact on them? What's their part to play within all of this as well? So, so I think that's a key part of the Centre 33 we'll be talking a lot about later on as well. Brilliant. Sam, thanks ever so much for sharing your experience. We've got a lot of health and social care professionals on the call. Is there any sort of key message or takeaway that you'd like to give to them in terms of that sort of message takeaway about carers? Or?
Yeah, it is just that looking at the family holistically, regardless of who's sitting in front of you, but also valuing what, you know, the carer is saying, and that linked up care between the various professionals as well, because, you know, especially when we're going into appointments, having to say the same thing and be the one who has to feedback on, you know, this appointment we had last week, the appointment we had 2 weeks ago, this is what was covered. It becomes really energy intensive. So the joined up care is also something that helps us, because we're not then having to carry the burden of being the sort of information hub for every professional.
Definitely, and again, I'll come on to that in it slightly later, because that's again something we've heard a lot from carers saying. Actually, it's almost they are, as you say, they're that information hub. They're having to pass a message from the hospital to the GP, or from the GP say, well, the GP said they put a referral through, or well, we've not got that referral from that sense, or they're having to update lots of different people. So I think how the system can sort of better talk to each other is really important. So. Yeah. Sam, thanks ever so much for coming on and sharing your experiences. It's so much more powerful hearing it firsthand in sense as well. And as I said, there'll probably be time for questions and sort of any sort of questions, observations. So Sam, if you're willing to answer any questions, then that'd be brilliant. But otherwise, there's no obligation to whatsoever as well. So from what Sam's told us, from what we've heard and seen so far, what does it tell us? It really tells us that actually there's a real need to ensure that all health and care professionals have that care awareness training. At the moment, it's a bit of a postcode lottery. Some do, some don't. So again, how do we make sure that's consistent across the piece? But also cover those who are training to become the health care professionals of the future. So we've done sessions with trainee nurses, we've done sessions with trainee occupational therapists. And again, it can really help ingrain some of that best practice and thinking carers before they get out into the field, before they get into the issue where they've got lots of pressures on their time as well. And really picking up on what Sam said, it's not just about people, but it's also around processes and systems. So it's really vital, particularly with the developments of the integrated care systems, with the developments of virtual wards, which if people haven't heard of them, are about how people can receive support at home rather than sort of being in a hospital bed from that perspective, but still needing some support. How do we make sure with all of these things going on, actually the systems are helping to join up the dots and sort of improve that communication? So it's, again, as Sam said, it's energy tapping for carers to have to be the ones relaying that message time and time again because a person's moved on. And again, we hear a lot from carers where they've had multiple social workers over the years, particularly parent carers, and the amount of times where they've had to almost start from scratch because, oh, that's not in our notes, can you just recap that? It can be really frustrating as well. Again, I'll be talking about it in a second, but we'd really encourage all health and social care organisations to sign up to the Carer Friendly Tick. I'll be talking about that in a moment as well. I've also said about the integrated care system developments. These are really big changes around health and how health and social care is funded and how it works in local areas. So it's really vital that carers, young carers, parent carers are really at the heart of the thinking around that. Not just about their experiences, that's obviously vital, but also how can we make sure these carers are identified earlier? I always use the example. If your partner has a stroke and gets taken into hospital, they may not have had any real major health conditions or health issues before they had that stroke. They go into hospital, they have a stroke. When they come out, you may well find yourself being a carer overnight. Their condition may have completely changed, but you're not prepared for it. People who are working in hospitals, people who are sort of care workers out in care homes or out in the community, they have to go through whole qualifications and whole lots of training, whereas unpaid carers have to really learn it on the fly from that perspective. So again, how do we make sure that we're thinking about carers and the impact it has on them so we can get support in as early as possible? And there is a real opportunity to work around hospital discharge to really improve that early identification and support for carers as well. And I think the final 2 points on this is saying actually this isn't something which we're asking for people to do as an extra. It's not something saying, oh, well, if you've got time. It really, what we're wanting is to get to a point where involving carers is part of business as usual. And the reason for that is because of the benefits it has, A, for the person receiving care, B, for the carer, but also for the health professionals. It helps them understand the bigger picture. It helps them understand what's going on. They can often get to the bottom of what's happening quicker. They might diagnose deterioration much quicker. And it also reduces the chances, I started this session, of the person going back into hospital from that sense. We've seen many times where carers have had to take the person they care for back to A&E or ring 111 or even 999 to say, I physically and emotionally, I can't cope. I can't cope with this. I'm not equipped for this from that sense. I haven't got the information, haven't got the support. And so they end up back in hospital. Or the person ends up in hospital and the person they care for end up in hospital as well. And so it requires that leadership. So within hospitals, within primary care GPs, within sort of integrated care system, really prioritising the needs of carers as well from that perspective. And I'm just going to finish before we've got, there will be time, and I'll stop sharing the screen for any questions, or if you want to come in with any comments and things as well, just to really flag the carer friendly tick. So this is an accreditation scheme that was designed by carers and is assessed entirely by carers. So it started in education, so it's set up by a group of young carers, but it's now been extended to health, communities and employers. And it really helps improve an organisation's ability to identify and support carers within their particular setting. So whether they're a GP surgery, a pharmacist, whether they're an occupational therapy team, a social care team, hospital discharge team, outpatients department, mental health team, any of those could apply for the carer friendly tick from that sense. And there's lots of support available. So we do care awareness raising sessions as a toolkit to support people for the carer friendly tick. But most importantly, what we hear from organisations is that they're identifying more carers, and also they feel better equipped to support those carers that they come into contact as well. So it's helping the carers, but also helping those settings as well. So if your organisation hasn't signed up for the carer friendly tick yet, I would encourage you to please check it out. There's a link there as well, and there's an email address as well. I'm going to stop sharing now because that's the final slide of things. I was wanting to make sure we had time for any questions. I'll just stop sharing my screen and just see whether, in terms of anyone, either there's any carers who want to come in and share their experience of anything that really chimes with them, or anyone who works with carers who's got any observations or any questions at all. Otherwise, I'll just have a quick look in the chat to see if anything's coming up. Not to put you on the spot at all from that perspective, but just wondering in terms of, so it's coming up as Plum A from that perspective. If you wanted to come in, because obviously you've talked about your work with the carer friendly tick from that sense. I was wondering if you'd be willing just to come in and talk about in terms of how you found doing the carer friendly tick, or how your experience has been.
Okay, I work at Adam Brooks in the early intervention team. So we have a kind of three parts to the team. We have discharge planning specialist nurses, frailty nurses, we've got therapists, and also we have a front of house social worker. So for us covering the A&E department and medical assessment, it was quite, we meet quite a lot of carers who come in, and some of them are actually at a crisis point. They've not had any support, they don't know where to get support from. And by us coming in, asking a question, probably hopefully when the person has gone for a procedure or an x-ray, how are you? It makes such a difference. They actually feel listened to. We're the first person to ask, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And we're the first ones who can offer kind of signposting, any support, just so they feel listened to and kind of spoken to about how they actually feel. At Adam Brooks, we try and promote the carers' passports, so they can carry on the caring role if they'd like to. We are trying to implement that in A&E if possible. Every ward does have a carer's passport and a carer's prescription. Carers can also get a badge and have open visiting on each ward, which we do advocate for all carers. Our frailty nurses are wonderful when they make the phone calls to ask relatives, have you been offered this? And if not, they make sure that the person will ask on the ward they visit. Getting the health tick was such a really good thing that we had because we can now promote caring roles and responsibilities throughout every ward we cover, and we'll let all the staff know. We try and do every new starter in the team. I try and do carers champion training for, and make them aware of the support that's out there. It's made a big difference. It's really good.
Brilliant. And I think that's just what you're saying about asking carers how they are. Really, it's something as simple as Jodie said. Actually, that's in everyone's gift to do from that perspective. And it's amazing how many times that throws carers off guard, being honest, being someone asking them, how are you doing?
Yeah.
So much of their focus is on the person they care for. Their whole lives revolve around the person or the people they care for. Actually, someone stopping to ask them, how are you, can make a huge difference.
It does.
Just to say, there's a question in the chat about how people can find out if their workplace has got the carer friendly tick from that perspective. And I think also there's a question in the chat around just in response to some of the work that you're doing as well. But Robert, did you want to come in, because you're one of our assessors for the carer friendly tick? Do you want to come in and share actually from your perspective on the other side of assessing carer friendly tick and what it's like seeing some of the great work that's going on? And whilst you're doing that, I'll put a link to the Hall of Fame for the carer friendly tick as to how to find out who's got it.
Yeah, I'm Bob. I'm a volunteer for Caring Together, and among other things, I am a part of a team of assessors for the carer friendly tick. So I don't see all of them. I just see whatever ones Caring Together throw at me. We don't pass everything by any stretch just on the nod. It actually gets some quite heavy scrutiny, but appropriate to the organisation. So a big organisation with lots of policies will get a more detailed scrutiny and held to a more rigorous paper standard than a small charity might. But the principles we're looking for are identical, that they actually don't just have a written policy, but do what it says on the tin. And that, I think, is that, and proving that they actually really care about it and are not just going for the tick as another thing to put on their letterhead. That's really important to us. We are carers. We want these organisations to look out for carers proactively, not just because they've got a policy sitting behind them somewhere and somebody occasionally reminds them of it. We want it embedded in what they do.
I think that's one of the great things about the carer friendly tick is it arms carers who say, well, actually, okay, you're my GP surgery, you've got the carer friendly tick, you're showing that logo as you're carer friendly, you say this is what's happening, but actually this isn't my experience, why not, from that sense. Similarly with employers, similarly with community settings. So it really helps, gives that transparency as to what support's available. So again, making it easier for carers in that setting to know, okay, if you get your medication from this pharmacist, this is what this pharmacy does to help carers from that sense. If your person is going to outpatients, this is what you can expect from outpatients from that perspective as well. So it really can help say for that setting what carers can expect as well. But just to say, in terms of, for those of you who are carers, if you are also working as well and your employer isn't on the list of those with a carer friendly tick, do please tell them about it. And again, feel free to send them in our direction. There's no cost for them to apply for the carer friendly tick. And because we have great assessors like Bob and other carers assessing it, it means that the team at Caring Together can help organisations hold their hand through the process from that sense as well. So doing the awareness raising sessions, but also giving a bit of useful advice. So often we'll get an application come in, and before we send it on to the assessors, we'll say, these are the sorts of things that assessors will often pick up from that perspective, or you haven't included this. We're more than happy to send it on to the assessors, but you might want to consider that. And I think that is really helping organisations, because then it means that they can think about things. And again, we don't want to take up carers' time if there's really obvious things that have been missed as well. And the other thing with the carer friendly tick is one of the key standards that the Young Carers wanted was that it only lasts for 2 years. What they didn't want is for organisations to get the accreditation, have it on their website, have it on their letterheads, everything else, and then actually all of the work fall off the radar in a couple of years' time because a person moves on or things change or they forget they had the carer friendly tick. So every 2 years they have to renew and say how they've built on it from that perspective. And there are organisations who haven't been re-awarded the carer friendly tick, so they've come off the Hall of Fame from that sense as well. Sam, just in response to your question, absolutely, education can earn it too. So we're working really closely with Centre 33. So Centre 33 do a lot of work with schools from that perspective. And again, I'll be talking in much more detail around that later on as well. But this is something that is going to be available. So there's a small number of schools and colleges who've got it in Cambs and Peterborough. There's lots more in Norfolk where we've been doing it for a number of years. But absolutely, schools will be able to apply for it. Colleges, universities. I struggle to think of any setting which wouldn't be able to fit into one of the 4 categories for the carer-friendly tick from that setting as well. So I think it'd be really encouraging them from that sense as well. And there we go. For those of you who are carer organisations, definitely, absolutely, you could be applying for it from the communities one, definitely from that sense as well. Brilliant. Has anyone else got any questions or things they want to come in? Sue, I think, Sue Evans, do you want to come in? Is your hand up there?
Yes, thank you ever so much. I was hoping, I tried to write a chat and obviously I didn't send it on, so it hasn't gone in there. Just to ask, is there a way that in hospital, the GP surgery, they know whether we've got a carer-friendly tick and if we've got local support? Because everybody knows it's so hard to trace or find carers. And I was just wondering if they, when they saw, these are from Burwell surgery, they've got local and they could say to the people, are you a patient or whoever, are you actually aware of that? Would you like us to give you a contact detail? Because we're just trying to find ways that we can reach out better. We have a carer-friendly tick. I didn't realise it was for 2 years, and that's made me put a note down for our next carers meeting to check when that's going to be due.
Well, I'm glad it's giving you that reminder. We can also check that for you as well. But yeah, part of what we're looking to do is help promote in terms, so if settings have got a champion, is help make it available to who the champions are within those settings. But also one of the other pieces of work we're wanting to do, which is linked to that, is around that communication between different health settings. So actually, okay, the GP surgery might know you're a carer, but how does the hospital know that you're a carer from that sense? Or Caring Together might know you're a carer from that sense as well. Jodie, I didn't know, again, apologies putting you on the spot. I didn't know if you wanted to come in and talk about some of the work that's going on around that sort of that data sharing and that sort of systems work. Just see if Jodie's still on the call. No, I'll talk to it. Jodie, are you there? Looks like Jodie's having an issue at the moment, but yeah, basically there's a lot of work going on at the moment to try and improve that data collection, so that actually if you're a carer and you've told your GP surgery, actually how do we make sure that goes to Caring Together? But also if you register a what if plan with Caring Together or you're registered as a carer with us, how do we make sure that your GP knows that from that sense? How do we make sure that if you go to hospital that knows it? And it sounds really simple. Sadly, it is a really complex piece of work because there are different systems in play as well. When I first started it, in my head, I was like, this surely must be something that's really simple. But when you've got multiple different systems in place as well, it is really challenging. But it is something we're looking to do to try and make it as easy as possible for carers so that people know, oh, hang on, this patient is a carer from that sense. And a number of the hospitals have got flagged to say that the person's a carer. But again, it's how do we make sure it's not relying on the carer to tell them and that the system can do the work for them. I think when we get to a point further down the year, I don't know when it's coming yet, but a shared care record, again, that's another piece of work which will hopefully help improve that situation as well. Asta, did you want to come in there? Asta, you see,
sorry, I kept talking, Thomas. I was muted. I'm so sorry.
It's always a way.
Yes, well, I wanted to say that from parent carers' point of view, that very often parent carers are not being recognized as carers, which is, I understand at some point in life, yes, when you have, a child, you are a parent, that's, fine. But parent carers, they're not being recognized as much as they should. Yes, we are parents, but we are also carers because, for example, I have a 14-year-old daughter. I still need to get her dressed. I need to feed her. I need to just dominate every single aspect of her life, help her to make those decisions, help her to grow and develop, but at the same time to keep her safe. But at what point parent carers will start being recognized that they are carers? Yes, they are their children, but they still also are carers. And that's sometimes what I find it very difficult, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, Asta, and that's something that we hear a lot from that sense, both from parent carers in terms of not being recognised by health and social care professionals. So, but actually, you're the parent, and that's what parents do. So actually, as you say, Asta, if you've got a 13, 14-year-old child, you wouldn't be expecting when that child's born that by the time they're 13, 14, you'll still be supporting them to get dressed or to be fed or to help them with toileting from that sense as well. But equally, we also see it in terms of adult carers as well, in terms of not recognising their carers as well from that perspective, or not being recognised, because often they'll see themselves as someone's partner, someone's brother, someone's son, daughter from that sense. But yeah, on the parent carer one, it's something that, as you know, we're working really closely with yourselves and Pinpoint to really try and improve that recognition of parent carers, and also make sure there's better support for them, because as we'll talk about later on in the day, parent carers have got legal rights just like adult carers do, just like young carers and young adult carers do. But again, it's, are they working in practice? The answer is no at the moment.
Yes, and I think what's very important to also recognize the sibling carers as well, you know, because my son, my eldest one, has not received any help for years and years and years at all, none at all. And, you know, I suppose he saw the whole caring thing quite differently. Well, that's my little sister, that's what I do. When mummy's poorly, I help her to the toilet, I got her food up, I help her to brush her teeth and so forth and so forth. I tell her to go to the toilet, and all of these things that, you know, that are put in place. Yes, it becomes natural for us, but I think sometimes it's not actually being recognized, that it's not something that everyone does on a daily basis for their 14-year-old sibling or whatever, they're maybe 5 or 10 or 20, but that's what it is. And especially we hear it from parents who have younger sibling carers. So for example, if they have you know, a 10-year-old who has significant needs and they have another 5-year-old, that 5-year-old is not being recognized as a carer, but actually they do so much for their sibling.
They do, and again, it's another group who, and I know Centre 33 are doing a lot of work, particularly around siblings at the moment, which they'll no doubt sort of talk about later on in the sessions about young carers. But yeah, absolutely, they're a group who, again, within schools, how do we make sure siblings are being identified from that perspective? Because as you say, it's not always the physical side of caring. Often, sometimes it's the impact on them, and we saw that particularly during the COVID pandemic, the impact on siblings from that sense. If they're sharing bedrooms, for example, actually just not having that escape from that space with them, saying actually they couldn't go out, they couldn't go to school from that sense. So now siblings are definitely another group where, again, we're really keen to make sure they're identified from that sense. And that's where, again, places like CPFT, so Cambridge and Peterborough Foundation Trust, if they're doing work with young people within their service, obviously, yes, having conversations with a parent, but also in terms of having sessions, having awareness of any brothers or sisters or siblings in the household, and the impact it might have on them. I've just seen someone in the chat saying about Centre 33's walk-in centre in Peterborough. So that obviously opened in the past couple of months. And again, it's that brilliant opportunity for young people to drop in. So I would really encourage people to make sure you come along to Centre 33 session around the young carers and what they support later on as well. Brilliant. Has anyone got any final questions or observations at all, or comments you want to come in? No? Brilliant. Well, hopefully it's been a really useful start to the conference for you and thinking about some of the issues from that sense. The next session will begin at 11:30, where we'll be looking at the impact of caring on carers. So thanks everyone for joining this session, and I look forward to seeing people later on in the day.